And welcome to the video Brainstorm. I'm meteorologist Matt Gray. I hope you are having a great week, a great weekend, and a great start to December. And with snow in the forecast, finally, we've had a little bit of wet snow, but really nothing that's really stuck to the ground for very long. We've kind of had one snowstorm so far this season. With more on the way, I figured I'd talk about something that kind of goes under the radar a little bit in forecasting, and that is how we get to how many inches of snow are expected to fall. Because we talk about sometimes, you know, we're going to get in this amount of rain, but how does that translate over to snow? How do we know? How do we give that it's going to be, you know, 2 to 4 inches at your house when we say that? Well, let's dig into that a little bit. So, first of all, and this is kind of the basic Weather 101 that they tell you in school as far as when you're comparing snow to rain. How much rain does it take, or how much wetness does it take, how much moisture it takes to create a certain amount of snow? And basically the baseline is a 10-to-1 snowfall ratio. So what does that mean? That means that for every 1/10 of an inch of rain, that would be equivalent to about an inch of snow if it all fell as snow. Now, obviously, this is a textbook world. These things don't happen as perfectly as this, but in general, most of the time and in most situations, you end up with a 10-to-1 snow ratio. So that means that, for example, if we have 1/2 inch of rain, which around here would be a pretty decent amount of rainfall to come in a day, well, that'd be 5 inches of snow. And guess what? That's a pretty decent amount of snow to fall in a day as well. And then, of course, an entire inch worth of moisture, well, that would be a full 10 inches of snow. And that would be a bonkers storm for sure, considering our average snowfall in Spokane is in the mid-40s. So, yeah, that would be quite a epic storm. Now, here is what we are looking at for Monday, at least with the forecast models. Now, obviously, computer models, as mentors of mine have said, the computer models are always wrong, but some of the time they are useful, especially when you average them all together. You can account for a lot of the errors in the computer models and give you at least a decent idea of what the computers are thinking at any given moment. Throughout the weekend, where instead of seeing perhaps 1, 2, 4 inches in many areas of the inland Northwest, instead a lot of that has come down quite a bit, with the exception of around the Palouse, where we're still looking at anywhere between, I'd say, 2 and 4 inches of snow accumulations. Of course, that's elevation, and a bunch of other things are dependent on that, including how long the snow falls for. That's an obvious one as well. But you look at the averages in a lot of the computer models, and it isn't showing a whole lot for places like Spokane and Sandpoint. It's a little more optimistic for places like Coeur d'Alene and around the Palouse as well. But you can see how that 10-to-1 snow ratio plays in, where we're talking about very light little sprinkles worth of moisture, less than 1/10 of an inch. Well, guess what? That doesn't really add up to a whole lot. That's a skiff, basically, of snow. And certainly, of course, any error in how much liquid is falling in these computers, how much liquid gets on the ground, or the placement of the moisture, that obviously will mean a lot down the line. So when we're talking about snow forecasting, it's one of the trickier things we have to do in meteorology, because any little error can compound on itself when we're talking about the placement of moisture, and then you have to factor in the temperatures as well to go in to making these forecast snow totals. Now, normally we use 10-to-1 as far as translating liquid to snowfall. However, it is not always 10-to-1. And that is because it depends on what kind of snowflake is on the ground. This is a very popular chart that is in basically every single weather textbook. And basically, you can see on the bottom of this graph, you have 0, -5, -10, -15. Yes, they use in Celsius, but you can see the Fahrenheit scale underneath. So basically, right at the freezing level, the type of snowflake that forms is actually different than where up in the clouds, where it's usually a lot cooler, you can see temperatures that are in the kind of around 0 degrees Fahrenheit, or maybe even cooler than that. But particularly that kind of 12 degrees to about -8 degrees is what we call the dendritic growth zone. That's very important because that's where those big, fat, fluffy snowflakes come from. And so if you have a large portion of your cloud layer where the snowflakes are forming in that zone, then that means that your snow ratio could be a little bit higher. In fact, in some cases, it could be high as 25-1. I know, crazy. But here's the other thing. If it's super, super cold, and you've seen really cold days where the snowflakes are really, really tiny, well, the colder it gets, now the snow ratio goes back down. It goes back down to 10-1, and even as low as 8-1 as you get into temperatures up in the clouds in that -20, -30 degrees Fahrenheit range. So there's a lot that goes into this. And basically, when we look at weather balloons or simulated weather balloons, simulated profiles in the atmosphere, what we want to look for is what's the warmest temperature that's saturated, that's where the clouds are forming. And that'll usually give us an idea of where along the curve, what kind of snowflakes are forming, and that'll give us an idea of the snow ratio. Now, the average of this whole profile here is 10-1, and in fact, most of the time we end up with a snow ratio of around 10-1, but it's not always the case, so you always have to double check. That's what makes this job interesting. That's for sure. So hopefully that gives you a little bit of an insight into what we're looking at as far as snowfall. Yeah, just got to remember that 10-1 ratio. And the fact that sometimes, in the right circumstances, it could be a little bit more than that, or if it's really, really warm snow, it could be even a little bit less than that. But in general, 10-1 is good. We're just moving the decimal point one spot over. So I hope you found that interesting. If you did, subscribe here to 4 News Now. We put out the Brainstorm videos about once a week. We also have all your latest news headlines. We have forecast updates 2-3 times a day to make sure that you are in the know about what's happening here in the inland Northwest. Thank you for watching. I will see you next time on the Video Brainstorm. Here is one example of what we can expect on Monday. I'd say this is probably about the best case scenario considering the trends in the forecast model. Thanks for joining me on the Video Brainstorm. Have a great week. We'll talk to you again soon.